Hey everybody, welcome to episode 406 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, joined by co-host James Dodds. How are you today, James?
Doing well.
Good to have you on this warm, not quite summer, but feels like it day here in Austin. We are finishing the last chapter of section 2 of the book. Section 2 of the book, we've been going piece by piece through the elements of training, kind of through the X's and O's. The last several weeks, we've been breaking down each individual run within the routine and talking about how to optimize it. Today, we're going to do that with a double click on the long run. So we've talked about the long run generally and all of the reasons why it's important. We've mentioned long run workouts, and I think we've even spent a little bit of time there already. But today, we're covering chapter 20, which is all about long run workouts. How do you incorporate quality work into your long run so that you're prepared as much as you can be for race day? So we're going to break down the do's and don'ts of long run workouts today. And then just as a quick preview before, or as we get into the next section, section 3 of the book, we actually start talking about the mental preparation for race day, which becomes ever important. So we've spent most of the last many episodes kind of covering the physical side of training. And then starting next week, we'll dive into the mental side, which, by the way, I've gotten some of the best feedback on the book about that section as, you know, something that's not always covered in training books. So excited about that. But first, again, we cover the long run workout. One thing I do want to mention at the top, because I don't want this to get lost in my postscript, is that I have had some one-to-one spots open up on my personal coaching calendar. So if you'd like to be coached one-on-one by me, then now would be a time to jump in.
That's exciting.
So I would encourage you, if you're interested, email me, chris@roguerunning.com. If you're interested in that, now is obviously a good time as we're kicking off the training for fall races to jump in with me. Only got a couple of spots open. So if you're interested, email me again, chris@roguerunning.com. Of course, you can also join all of our other options as well, as now is a good time for all of it. But in particular, these spots don't come open very often. So jump on it if interested. Okay, let's jump in. But first, how we doing?
Good. You brought up warm, humid, almost summer. I'm like, it's summer to me. It's freaking June in Texas. And I'm like, whoo. You know what? Anyone that doesn't live here, I just want to say, and anyone in the South, I include right now. And that's, you can't trust the number. Like, I think it says 85 or 84.
Right.
And if you're just casually on the internet and you're like, what are these Austin guys whining about? And you find out that it was like 82 when I went on my run. I'm just telling you, we've had so much rain, which is beautiful. Everything is green. I am so thankful. But I was going to say, I am using choice right now. I am choosing to be happy about my run. I am choosing to say, I am thankful that I can run, because that humidity right now, man, it's
something. It's something, which is a good kind of reminder as a quick side note on just the importance of hydration. And it's kind of funny. I do think this, you know, is individual, but it's also dependent a little bit on your climate. I've seen somebody post on the socials about how they don't understand why electrolyte supplementation is such a big deal. Now, this was somebody from the Pacific Northwest who has, you know, dry and relatively mild summers relative to what we face here. But the reality is, for us in our climate, hot, humid, especially in the mornings, I just don't think you can get through summer training in any rigorous way without it.
Mm-hmm.
On Saturday, just a quick side note, we had our Rogue long run. I ran 16 miles with the crew here, you know, our normal Saturday morning start time. Brought my handheld, my 20-ounce handheld, because I was like, I'm going to be on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was hydrated coming in. I'm going to make sure I'm consistently drinking throughout, was mixing Gatorade and water out there on the course. And so I was feeling really good about being on top of it, you know, and, you know, felt great on the run. You know, obviously it was a bit of a swim more than a run at times, it felt like, because of the humidity. We were really sweating like crazy. And then afterwards, I'm always big on, all right, got to get back to peeing normally, you know, rehydrate post as well. Was on top of that, except I had missed the electrolyte supplementation part of my after routine. So normally I'll mix sea salt in with my water post or Element, or there's another product that's called Salt that I use on occasion. And so I'd just forgotten that in the mix of kind of getting in the routine with the family the rest of the day. And so later in the day, right before dinner time, I started just feeling a little off, like a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. Like maybe I ate something, you know, it was kind of like not really nausea, but a little bit of just like feeling off in the head. And as I was going to dinner and we were going out, Amy and I with the couple friend, I just realized like, oh shoot, I haven't been doing the electrolyte stuff, which, you know, again, on a really humid, you know, 16-mile run, I was depleting a lot of that. So I hadn't replenished the electrolytes at the same time as I was replenishing the fluids. So I started to feel a little off. So then I'm like, okay, I got to fix this. And the only thing I had access to in that moment at a restaurant was the table salt. So I was pouring table salt in my hand and dumping it in the water and stirring it up and drinking it. And sure enough, a few glasses of that, I started to feel better right away. And it was just a reminder for me, even if somebody who's on top of it, who knows best, you know, or knows, you know, better, who's tried to do the right thing, you know, ran with the handheld, was doing all the right thing, just missed that one piece. And it just made me feel a little bit weird. And, you know, had I not rectified it, I think it would have accumulated into something a little bit, you know, worse. And so anyway, just a reminder, man, stay on top of your hydration with electrolytes. It's kind of a part-time job right now.
It really is. And for all the physiological reasons, you should do it, but there's also tons of cognitive benefit too. So I was kind of surprised to hear anyone would, I'm not even a supplement guy. I'm not necessarily against them per se, but I just try to be as minimal as possible because I am just afraid of dependencies in life, period. I do not want to be dependent upon anything.
Yep.
And so the idea of going with too many supplements, I get that. I just want any listener to know that I'm in that kind of bucket of when in doubt, don't. Like, lean on normal stuff. Like, if it grows or you can kill it, like, take that in, you know, eat it. So like meat and vegetables and fruit and all that. Anyway, where I'm going though is even being that kind of in that camp of thinking, I'm still a electrolyte guy, like every morning.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say what I appreciated most was your resourcefulness. That's the key there. You like not, oh crap, I didn't have my electrolytes. Let me moan about it. You said, what do I have around me? Ooh, NaCl, boom, got it. Table salt in.
Yeah. And it worked. It worked. Started feeling better almost immediately. And, you know, that's one thing too on this electrolyte. Again, we're digressing here a little bit, but it's related to long runs because you need to hydrate well on them. Is, you know, you don't have to spend, I mean, the LMNT stuff, I mean, it's like $1.50 per packet. You know, it can get pretty expensive if you're supplementing daily with electrolytes, which we recommend in a hot and humid climate. And so you can get sea salt in a lot of different forms. I use Baja Gold sea salt, but you can get, you know, research your sea salt and just, you know, use a teaspoon of that in 20 ounces of water and you can't really taste it. It doesn't taste salty, you know, mixes in well. And, you know, I think I bought a bag of that, like a 1 pound bag of that sea salt for $20 or something. And, you know, it'll last me probably years because I'm just doing a pinch each time, you know, a couple of pinches each time. So anyway, doesn't have to be crazy expensive to get your electrolytes in the summer, but we do recommend it if you're in the hot and humid realms.
I pictured you setting an Amazon subscription to once every 5 years you get your new
right, exactly. Get my 1 pound of sea salt. Okay, we digress. Let's talk about long run workouts. First, before we're going to give you do's and don'ts, 4 of each, and then we'll just talk about a few examples of these workouts, which I know we've covered perhaps before. But before we get into the do's and don'ts, I just want to quickly cover the basic question of why do we do long run workouts? You know, we know why we do long runs generally: build aerobic capacity, build neuromuscular resilience, work on metabolic conditioning. But what does the long run workout add to the mix?
It adds quite a lot. At the very least, it's back to that idea of progression overload. It's an advancement in the stress and rigor in the name of development. So as long as you've, like, let's say, run a 20 miler, a few 20 milers, then it makes sense to put on an advancement in that. And instead of necessarily taking the risk and going up to like 24 and 26 miles before you hit race day, it's like, well, wait, on race day, I know I'm going to be running a little bit faster. And so we can start adding the proper stress. I'm being careful here because I don't want people to get run wild with that, but it fits the idea of progression overload. I'll say that first. And then also, I think a term that might help us throughout this whole conversation, and it fits well with this chapter and this topic, but that's specificity of training. And so that's not even a very big concept. It's pretty straightforward. Is your training specific to the demands of the event? Like if you're about to do, this is the part that's sort of intuitive at first that people misapply. And so we've spent all this time talking about the counterintuitive piece of like slow down, let your body develop and everything. But this is where some people's thinking was correct, but maybe misleads them. And that's, wait, on that day, I'm going to be running 26 miles at a faster pace than what I'm currently doing my 20 milers at. And so shouldn't I practice that? So yes, to a degree, you should practice it. And we're going to talk about how to properly do it so you don't overdo the stress load. But I would say it's specificity of training. It's getting you ready to get closer to that extreme high demand event.
Yep. What does a race require is a question we like to ask around here in building a training plan. And one of the things that a long race requires is the ability to mimic it in a safe way in training. And that's kind of what the long run workout does, is it allows you to mimic race day conditions, pacing, other variables, which we'll talk about, without going to the well so that you don't have it when race day arrives. So it's to use a segue into our first do, it's a simulation. And we like to call these race simulations or race preps. These long run workouts, not that you're doing a full race or even necessarily running most of the long run at race pace. That'll only be a subset. But you do want to treat these runs, so our first do is like it's a simulation for race day. And that doesn't just mean pace, and it doesn't mean run race pace the whole time. We'll talk about how we break it down as we get into examples later. But we want you to mimic as many variables as you can for race day so that you can work out the kinks, so to speak. Think of it like in team sports, scrimmaging, or if you're in theater, the dress rehearsal. These are opportunities to do all the things you're going to do on race day and practice them and test them out, but then have the grace of being able to fix it and make mistakes and come back from it. So it should be a simulation of race day. And in that way, we like to think about it in sort of all the ways you can simulate race day, from your routine before the long run, to the terrain you're running, to the gear you're wearing, and then obviously to the pace that you might be trying to hit, in segments on the run, as well as nutrition and hydration, which I almost left off the list, practicing that final piece as well. So it's simulating all of those things as closely as you can to the variables that you're going to achieve or use or put to work on race day itself.
I'm glad we covered hydration in the intro then.
Right.
So I think dress rehearsal sits extremely well, is like a perfect way to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of that, and we'll kind of touch on this theme as we go through the whole episode today, is that when you think about, like, if you were in theater or if you were on a team sport, scrimmage, dress rehearsal, if you think anything like that, those are opportunities, again, to practice all the variables, to try to give yourself an opportunity to practice race day conditions as closely as possible, or day one production conditions or game day conditions, but with plenty of grace. I think there's, and we'll cover this a little bit in the don't side, but we don't want you to put too much pressure either on it. Like, personally, as a coach, I like people to make mistakes or to have things pop up in these simulations, because it forces you to then problem solve, figure it out. It shows you where your issues are, where your weak points are, so you can fix it before you get to race day. And even if you have a tough day from a running or pace perspective, I don't mind that either, because it's a way to kind of get that out, fight through it mentally, shake out the bad day so that you save the good day for when it counts. So it doesn't have to go perfectly either, is one thing I want to emphasize. And if you were doing a dress rehearsal, if you're in theater, or if you were in a scrimmage in a soccer or football context or something like that, you're going to make mistakes and it's going to be fine. Like we're in this era of World Cup friendlies right now. World Cup starts the day this episode or the day before this episode will release. And all the teams have been doing these friendly matches with top level countries to give them the opportunity to test their lineups, to figure out their tactics, to, go to work on all the ways that, the conditions on match day one will pop up, but at the same time, they might be subbing in all their subs, instead of just a handful, and so you're giving yourself that opportunity, and nobody's judging those matches based on wins and losses necessarily. They're judging it based on how did the team look? Did they play well together? Were they competitive? Would they fight through the challenges? The U.S. lost to Germany 2-1 in their second friendly match in prep, but everybody walked away feeling good about it because they were competitive. And they gave Germany, a top team, a run for their money in a sense. So all the fans know, hey, doesn't matter. How do we look? And so kind of carrying that same mentality into your simulators is important.
I love that analogy because, a coach is going to be looking at it and looking at all these different angles and making sure he's getting all his players moved in and everybody's got some practice time so he can observe what he's looking for. But then at the same time, also like dynamics and chemistry and everything. And where I'm going with this is that, Lydiard used to talk a lot about developing the inner coach in you. And I think that's just the right mindset is like on a long run workout, you should be both coach and athlete at the same time. Or I like to say scientist and subject both. Don't go in with this white knuckle approach of I gotta get this. And if I get it, it means I'm a winner. And if I don't, it's somehow I'm a loser. But rather hey, what observations am I supposed to be making here? And what can I take away from it? It's that's a completely different mindset to approach it in. So I love the metaphor.
Yep. Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it shouldn't be perfect. And if you're holding yourself to that standard, then the mentality isn't quite right yet. So do number one, it's a simulator. Treat it as such. I guess before we move to two, I do want to just make sure we dig into some of those other categories. So again, when you think about gear, what are the shoes you're going to wear on race day? Use those for these types of runs. What are the singlet, shorts, t-shirt, whatever you're going to be wearing on race day? Try to replicate those items as well. Terrain. It's not always possible to mimic the course terrain of the race you're doing, but we like to, at least for one of our big race preps, usually towards the end of the cycle, try to mimic terrain as much as possible. So here in Austin, we have a Boston simulator, for example, which is a net downhill course with 4 climbs that mimic the Newton Hills in it. So it helps us simulate those terrain conditions as well so that you can practice running race effort over variable terrain. And the same would be true if it's a flat course you're going to race. Try to find a flatter simulator. And so just wanted to double click on a couple of those other areas as well. And it's not always possible to do those things. And so if you can't, no big deal. But if you can, do it. And it's kind of a fun challenge to find a course that's similar to what you might face on race day. So do number one, it's a simulator. Do number two is you want to challenge yourself. These should be hard, but you don't want to overdo it. We'll cover this twice. So it's kind of you always want to leave something left out there and not treat this like it is the race itself, or it will become that. And I can think of a time in Rogue's history where we overdid these race preps. I mean, it's been probably 10 plus years since we've been there, but there were times where I think we were a little too aggressive on some of these. And so you have to be cautious to challenge yourself appropriately, but not to execute your race or to end up making your race preps race day.
Yeah. I like to come at this from like we had talked about the progression of things, and so we also talk a lot about incremental gains, and so I think that's like the positive mindset we want people in, and that like, yeah, you want to challenge yourself. We are saying yes, go forward, and you're adding a stimulus here, and there's a lot of good reason for it. And also remember, like the cautious side that we're also avoiding, that as coaches we're never ignoring. It's there. We just don't talk about it like ad nauseum. But it's like, remember your trailing weeks. Like you have stress already built into the program. In theory, where we're entering this conversation, we're assuming that you already recognize you've been increasing mileage through your season. You've been doing quality workouts. Those quality workouts went from like priming workouts into that aerobic strength. So they got a little more aggressive and longer and a little bit more stressful, right, as you progress. And so now that you're layering in these long run workouts, it's the proper time, the proper stimulus, but incremental gain, like inch forward is the idea. Because when you look at it in isolation, you're like, well, I've done 20. And so now I want to do 20 miles at MGP. I'm like, that's a silly jump. And it's you're forgetting that you're not just riding the advancement in that one workout. Remember, your program had been advancing in volume and in stress in the way of quality workouts. So now we're adding this as an additional layer to it. So when you add on, you're just adding a little in the name of challenge, stress, therefore growth. Don't get crazy with these. And some of the ones we have are big and robust, but that's because we know where to place them for the right athlete at the right time.
And you build into it, and somebody with the right experience level is going to be able to handle more than somebody else. So, there's all those variables, but you do want to make sure that you're riding the right line here. This should be a race simulator. It should be a stimulus that makes you think about race day and tests you in certain ways, but it shouldn't bury you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I've had at least one experience I can think back to going, probably 15 years back where I basically had my race day on my last long run workout and then was therefore cooked for race day itself and then ended up fading late. And so, it's a fine line, but it's one that you want to generally be on the more conservative side of, if in doubt, so that you don't end up kind of pushing yourself over the edge before you even taper. So be cautious of that. But, it should be an appropriate challenge. And as you said, a progressively loaded challenge so that, as you build into these, and we typically recommend 1 to 3 long run workouts, depending on your experience level. But for those that are doing 3 or 2, your first one's going to be a little more mellow. Second one's going to be more rigorous. Third one, if you're doing it, even more rigorous. So you're kind of building them as you go as well.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind. But that's a good segue into our third do, which is that you want to build from one to the next with these long run workouts. So each one should be a little bit more challenging than the other. I think we typically have a pretty standard framework for how we kind of build these long run workouts. Typically the first one's always just race pace in smaller segments. So it might be 2 mile or 3 mile segments in the middle of the long run at race pace or near race pace. And that's usually our first long run workout. And if you're only doing one, that's probably all you're getting. Then if we go to the second one, we tend to like to work in some kind of in and out pacing where we're mixing in some faster paces with race pace, but in relatively manageable doses. Mm-hmm. I wrote one for our crew, for the Renegades crew that is for this season. That's going to be preview for everybody who might be listening. A fartlek style workout where they're going in and out 1 minute at faster effort. I think 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes at marathon pace, kind of going back and forth in 20-minute chunks. And then they'll repeat that a couple of times after some recovery. So, manageable doses, but switching in and out of pace so that you can learn the concept of recovering at race pace. And then when we get to that last one, usually that's going to be the most rigorous, most aggressive, I guess, or challenging, but still manageable where we've got a few different ones that we like there, which we can talk about when we get to the examples. But typically that's where we want it to be as closely mimicking that simulation of race day as possible, where you're getting some early progressions as you would progress early in a race, some late progressions so that you're learning to progress late in the long run on tired legs. And that can come in a few different forms, but you're going to be getting some longer segments at race pace with typically some progression involved to teach yourself that, hey, I can run faster than marathon pace when my legs are tired at the end of a 20 miler.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some, I don't want to say examples of workouts, even though they are, it's more just how we kind of construct the build from one to the next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I'm writing a program, I actually will write out all the mileage first, including the taper and the date of the race, marked in bold, italicized 26.2 or 13.1 or whatever their race day is, 5K, 10K, etc. And what I'll do is back up with the taper, and then I'll actually decide what do I want that final long run kind of, let's call it keystone, anchor kind of period on the end of the sentence workout to be. And that can shape not only the two, well, I'll leave it at the long run workout since that's the chapter we're in. That shapes then a modified, less intense variation of that 3 weeks before as long run quality 2. And then I look at long run quality 2 and say, how do I pull some stress out of that and keep the key elements in long run quality 1, 3 weeks even before that. So then when the way the athlete experiences it is 1 and then 2 and then 3. But what I do to ensure that I've got my mind around total stress load is I write number 3 first and work backwards from it.
Yeah, then the other 2, you're building the subcomponents slowly, right? So you're not throwing it at somebody all at once. I think another thing to mention, you talked about that 3-week interval, which we'll come back to as well. But the timing of these, where they fit into a cycle. Typically, if someone's doing 3 of these, that first one might be at the very end of the strength phase, and then you're working the other 2 into the race specific phase. Or sometimes, depending on the length of everything, they might all 3 fit into the race specific. But basically, these are all coming after you have built your base and primed your system, gotten through most of the strength phase, and now we're starting to put the final touches on. So this is a tactic or skill or a type of run that fits later in the cycle appropriately, with your most challenging ones solidly in that race specific phase. And usually the last big long run workout we'll do right before the taper. So for marathoners, it'll be that last long run 3 weeks out. Half marathoners might be 2 weeks out. So that's something to keep in mind with regards to placement, but you're not doing long run workouts in the priming phase. That would be way too specific at that stage in the game. So build from one to the next, really important. And then the last do here is you want them to be, not all of them necessarily, but as we said, 2 of the 3 often in our world incorporate both race pace as well as work that's faster than race pace. And I've had people complain in air quotes, or talk to me about this. They're like, oh, why don't you have me doing, 10 miles at marathon pace? I mean, that's just not something I've ever written. And the answer is because, one, that's probably too much race pace in general. So that's kind of too long. But it's also a matter of, we want race pace to be efficient. So we like to do in and out stuff, which kind of combines faster work with race pace so that race pace feels easier. So there's a part of it that's about making race pace feel efficient and smooth. And then there's another part of it for me of forcing you to have to find race pace multiple times during the workout, because a marathon, especially as you start the race and you're trying to work down and find that groove, it's an exercise in how efficient are you at finding race pace and doing it in a way that doesn't overcorrect, go too fast and then have to pull back and yo-yo. And so being able to go from any pace to race pace, even if it's recovery pace, is a skill to learn and develop. And the better you are at it, the better you'll be able to find race pace when your watch isn't working through the tunnel in Chicago in mile 1.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why we like to do the combination of the two types of paces.
Yeah. And this is just adding on like a fun pile on, because there's actually so much that they get out of this stuff. And again, I'm always cautious when I say it, because I know how the world works, where when these get whittled down to 90-second clips, people will hear about how valuable a long run workout is, and they just add that and they ignore the hundreds of hours we put in about talking about going slow, right?
Right.
It's like in the same balance we have on intensity and easy running in our conversations is about what should be reflected in your actual training life. But where I'm going with that is, you're getting that like ability to recover at race pace and find it. You were talking about developing that skill to find it, and also in the spirit of simulation and like specificity of training, we also know that it's not quite as intense as 26.2 miles at race pace, right? And so we want to mimic similar feelings. Like, it would be too risky to say, like, I want to prepare this athlete for what it's going to feel like at mile 23 of the marathon and how to run through it. Well, if we assign them 23 miles at that pace, that's too much stress. That will spend all their fitness. They'll prevent any peaking. They're done, game over. Can't use that option. That's just not even a consideration in my mind. So the question becomes, well, what's happening when Chris puts this 10K pickup on the front end and then they're settling into race pace? Each time they do that pickup, let's say they're at mile 12 of that long run, but it's starting to feel more like mile 18 on race day, because you're creating an intensity that they won't be doing on race day that then makes them go find that race pace. And so they're also getting to, quote, simulate the feeling even of late stage miles, which is just as valuable. Like, you need the skill set, you need to be exposed and aware of the feeling and how you're going to manage yourself when you feel like that, etc. So there's like layers of benefit.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's a way to simulate that late race fatigue without running 26 miles, because everybody wants to know, can I run 26 miles at X pace? Well, you can't know.
Right.
You can't know until you go do it. Because if you could know, then we wouldn't do it. So, how do you give yourself the confidence or simulate that feeling? Well, partially by running some faster work in there. And one of the things we like to do in the middle of some of these is do a fartlek, where you're doing like one on at 5K pace, one easy for 2 or 3 miles. That generates fatigue. It's only for that. It's not actually about the pace at all. It's just for generating fatigue, so that when you then go back to marathon pace or progression from marathon pace, your legs feel like a little bit like they might at the end of the marathon.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great point, is that faster work helps you mimic some of that race day fatigue that you're going to face. And a part of that is it's building neuromuscular resilience as well, mental resilience of being able to deal with those types of variables and stay on it even when you're starting to get tired. So it's really, really formative in that sense. Which actually reminds me, kind of digressing a little bit, going back to the race simulator concept, is this should also be a simulator of the mental tools you're going to use for race day. I love for people to have their mantras kind of drafted out, rhythm mantras, fight mantras, which we'll talk about in later chapters as well. But have those in your head and practice using them in these long run workouts. Try them on for size, see what works, see what resonates, see what sticks in your mind when the going gets tough, so that you can then hone a little bit what you might actually use when the race matters. So it's a mental simulation as well. So those are the 4 do's. It's make it a simulation of race day, challenge yourself, but don't overdo it. Build these long run workouts from one to the next, and use a combination of race pace and faster than race pace as you do it. Let's get to the don'ts. Most important don't here is you don't want to add distance and intensity at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So, what this means very, very practically for me as a coach is that if someone hasn't done a distance yet, we're not doing a long run workout at that distance.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I've got a marathoner who's doing a long run workout at 20 miles, they're going to have to run a 20-mile easy run first. Or if I've got a half marathoner doing a long run workout at 14 miles, they're going to have to run a 14-miler first, maybe even a 16 miler at easy efforts. So you want to be hitting the distance that you're going to do the long run workouts at before you then add the long run workout to that distance. And it's critical, absolutely critical that we get that order right. Because if you do both at the same time, you add miles and intensity, that is a recipe for getting hurt. And this is not the point of these workouts. We want to get you to the start line healthy. So do not, under any circumstances, add distance to your long run and add intensity at the same time. That is a major violation. Red card, to use the Thacker theme.
Yeah, and that does happen quite a lot, especially with people on, or where they try to, with people who kind of got themselves into a little bit of shorter season, because they see all of this in a video game like format that sort of like, if I collect all these points, somehow I'm better on race day, instead of looking at themselves like a biological creature where time is an element, right? And recovery is an element. And so don't get me wrong, I like using gamification because that helps things mentally, but this one's critical because if you over stress it, then again, you could be spending your fitness or you could get yourself injured. Either one, which would suck. You don't want to take away your peak and what you want to be able to spend on race day, and you want to avoid getting injured. And so there's been even times where, like, let's say I would like all of the long run qualities to be at the 20-mile volume for a marathon. That's nice. Well, what that means is I need at least 6 20-milers total in your program if you're going to get all 3 at that, because I abide by that rule. I'm like, This is your first 20. That means nope. Okay, you can't do a quality on that one. Now that you've done 20 and we've passed that, and the reason for that is that's a checkpoint. As a coach and an athlete, both should be thinking like, okay, you did 50 miles in volume this week, capped off by a 20-mile long run, and you hit this big workout midweek, and you're fine, you're healthy, you're good, we don't have to make adjustments, then you may proceed to the next stimulus. Like if you slow yourself down back like that and say like, okay, I know I wrote, this is part of that language of the sheet serves you, you don't serve it. It's like, you're a biological creature and we're trying to push towards maximization and optimization, but without tearing, hurting, breaking down.
Yep.
And so I've even done before where it's like I might have gotten someone to 20, and then the following week, what I might do is put in 18 with their quality. So what I'm doing is I'm like, okay, their body just hit 20 and it's fresh and they're fairly new to programming and everything. And I'm a little worried about just how they're responding to the 20 milers in general. Okay. Then I'll drop down to 18 and give the long run quality 1. So now that it's at a volume I'm certain they're okay with, but I'm coming at it from this intensity angle now. And so I treat volume as a stressor or intensity as a stressor. And when you double up, bad things happen.
Can't double up, which also brings up the point about skipping, because some people will maybe miss a long run quality for whatever reason. Maybe they're sick, maybe something came up. So they'll miss that first one. They've got the 20 miler in and they were cleared to do the long run quality with 20, but they missed it for some reason. And then they're wanting to think about how do I make it up? Well, the next week's a down week. So don't want to necessarily do it then because we need that recovery opportunity. And then in a couple weeks, you're going to have another long run quality. Do you just skip to number 2 even though you didn't do number 1? The answer is no. You got to do it in sequence. Go back to long run quality 1. May mean you don't get all 3 long run qualities, but as you said, you can't skip steps. Otherwise, bad things can happen. So it's really important that you maintain the integrity of the sequencing in all of this. And, that extends into these runs, but also as we've talked about with all the other runs, got to have the sequence of quality, recovery, long run, just like we talked last week with recovery runs. So, the sequence is important and you can't skip. If you skip, that's where injury happens. So don't do that either. Don't add intensity and distance at the same time, and don't skip from one long run quality to the next, having not done the first. So that's our first don't. Second don't is don't just run race pace for the entire run. I mean, this one, I get it, right? It's like, because there's a natural thought that comes to your head, not knowing any of this stuff that we've been talking about, that says, hey, I need to run race pace for 26.2 or 13.1. I'm just going to gradually extend the distance I do. And maybe I don't do 26, but I do 20 miles of race pace as a practice run so I can feel confident about doing 26 miles at race pace. And that's just doesn't work, you know, for a lot of reasons. Physiologically, it's all off, puts too much stress on the system. So you're likely to break or get injured from that. It doesn't prioritize the things that actually really matter at helping you run race pace for 26.2 or 13.1, which is that aerobic capacity built from the easy, slow running. And so somebody who's been doing that is wasting big chunks of time in their long runs. And I've had these moments before. I remember vividly a couple of times when I did the Austin course talks, and I would, you know, have people ask questions or come up to me afterwards and ask questions. And inevitably, you know, I would get somebody from the community that didn't train with us, and they would say, "Hey, I'm trying to figure out what I can run for race day. You know, I've done 20 miles at what I think is race pace. Should I target that on race day?" And, you know, the thought going through my head, which I'm trying not to say out loud, is, oh no,
Yeah.
you've screwed this all up.
You already ran your race, pal.
You already ran your race. So basically I can't help you at this point. So don't do that. You know, these long run workouts are not intended to be, you know, all done at race pace or even big chunks at race pace. I mean, the longest we typically prescribe for an advanced runner would be 5 miles, typically at race pace, or maybe with a progression off of race pace. Not more than that. You know, we're not doing 10-mile chunks at race pace. And you might end up with 10 total miles of work, maybe even slightly more than that in the run, but there's recovery elements built in. There's maybe some faster work, some slower work. You're managing it creatively so that you're not just running race pace for 20 miles or race pace for 13.1 miles, or that's your race. So do not do that or be tempted to do that. Which kind of also gets me to this question we get often, which is that, well, then how do I know I can do it on race day? You know, like that's always the $1 million question. If I'm running slow most of the time, only doing workouts once a week and only doing 3 of these long run workouts, how do I know I can do it on race day? So how do you answer that? Because we get that question all the time.
I call it elastic thinking. Magnus, actually, I read some of his stuff, and he actually, I came across a cool section. He talked about zoom in, zoom out, and I was like, anyway, it doesn't matter. But I was like, hey, like, I was like, I'm on this page. And this is the part where it's like, some of the theories I present sometimes may paint me as a caricature who's like way out there. But this is actually very, very, very important. You need to be able to see, the language I learned it around was beyond the utility of an object. So beyond single isolated observations, yes, there is the observation you can make in the single long run session that may or may not give you confidence around that question, can I do this on race day, or how do I know that I can? You zoom out and you listen to everything we've been talking about, the distribution of stress loads and how everything interacts. I'm going to be like, well, okay, let's say you're at about a 50-mile week that started with a Monday at 12 miles that had a 9-mile quality day of which 5 was at race pace or faster. You continued through your week doing workouts. It was preceded by another 50-mile week, and now on this Saturday, you're going to do 20 miles with 10 total quality miles, but recovery spaced out. What we've done is we've taken the stress load in the spirit of preparing you for race day and doing X pace for 26.2 miles. We've broken it down to its little component parts and let you practice that in weekly rhythms 2 weeks straight for every 2-up week cycle for 20 weeks in a row. So you have to trust the system. You have to trust the entire field of biology and biochemistry and neurology, as well as physiology and kinesiology. It's like, we've looked at it from like, what's lactate doing in your body? How are the muscle fibers themselves being recruited? When are they exhausted and too fatigued? It's like, it's not just a single session observation. I ran 20 miles at X pace. It's no, I took stress and incrementally and methodically in a sophisticated manner slow dripped it into my body across 24 weeks such that everything I need is now inside me. And then you take that confidence to race day, a little bit of trust and a willingness to go to the well. I mean, that probably sounds like an oversimplification, but that is how I see it. Like,
I mean, it doesn't sound like an oversimplification. I think the summary there is there's a method to the madness, right? I mean, there's systems here. And, the analogy I like to use in these conversations is a puzzle analogy. If you're trying to build a puzzle and that puzzle is a picture of a race in a certain time. And if you think about a puzzle, no two pieces of a puzzle are the same. And so you've got all these pieces, not only do they have different images on them, but they also have different ways that they're connected together. And so just running race pace for long runs and workouts and easy runs, you're basically taking the same piece and replicating it over and over again across your table where you're building this puzzle. And so you then have an incomplete picture, completely incomplete picture. A complete picture requires all the subcomponents that you talked about. The easy runs, the longer easy runs, the medium long easy runs, the recovery runs, the qualities that we work, to prime the system so that you can then do the qualities that build strength, so that you can then do the qualities that build race specific work, the speed, the strides, the fueling adaptations that you get along the way, the long run workouts as we're adding those into the mix now, the mental prep. So you need all these types of pieces in order to have a complete picture. And if you just build one piece or put one piece out there, you're not going to be able to have a complete picture. So that's another way to look at it, which again requires a level of faith. But I always remind people in these situations, you can't know. You can't know. And so don't try to know by doing something that's outside of the system, but rather trust the system and then have faith that it'll work and then go do the thing. And look, you're going to do the thing and then want to the next thing. And it's going to build confidence in the system, but there'll still be that devil on the shoulder occasionally that wants you to do something silly to prove to you that you can do it. So anyway, we went off on soapboxes there a little bit, but it's important. I think
worth it.
Yeah, well worth it. Important for sure. Our third don't here is don't bury yourself. So it's kind of a replication of the other side of one of our do's, but it's just critical. I mean, obviously, in this phase of the game, you're in the race specific phase. You're doing these final long run workouts. You're riding the edge. You're getting close to the line intentionally so that the body is peaked for race day. But you have to be very, very careful not to overdo it. And this isn't just from a planning perspective, because we've kind of talked about that part of it already. You want to make sure that these are incremental, that you're ready for it, that you're not jumping from one thing to the next and all of that. But there's also a part of this that works into the execution of these long run workouts, which is that if it's going poorly, if things start to get sloppy and fall apart, you have to know when to kind of pull the plug on these things as well. And so, part of this don't is in the moment, if things are falling apart or if a little injury pops up or if, something's off that your gut says, hey, this isn't right, then you got to stop, and or bail on the workout part of it and just run easy if that's what you're feeling. So it's not just the planning, it's also the execution. Don't injure yourself. Don't go beyond the point of no return. Don't bury yourself in a way that you can't then recover. Because if you waste everything that you've been building for this workout, then what are you going to have for race day?
Yeah. I remember way early in my coaching reading, the number one reason why people don't hit their goal on race day is because they don't make it to the starting line.
Yeah.
It's like,
there you go.
just avoid that. Like,
Right.
Don't overdo it. And don't I swear this is a game of cooking under easy eggs. Like that's, I've just landed in a spot where if I look back on everything I've learned,
lower
it's
heat than you think.
Yeah. I mean, I think every runner should actually practice
Take it
perfecting the over easy egg. And once they think they've perfected it, now never cook it on the same pan again. Learn how to cook it in as many different pans on as many different stovetops with as many different heating sources as they possibly can think of. That's when you've mastered the over easy egg. And it really does fit as a metaphor here.
I mean, it reminds me of an article I once read, and I think it was the New York Times, about how to cook the perfect scrambled eggs. And one of the keys, apparently, in cooking the perfect scrambled eggs, at least from the perspective of this author chef, was slow. You don't, most, like when I think of scrambling eggs when I was a kid and learned to do it, and my mom would do it, the pan would get hot, you throw it on there, and you're like doing this, making sure they're mixed up so they don't burn to the pan. And those things are done like that. There's no patience in the process. And sure, it churned out eggs that were fine, right? Mm-hmm. But apparently, if you want those finer scrambled eggs, then you got to slowly cook them. Keep the heat lower. Let them slowly build into a scramble. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's what we're talking about here. When in doubt, and then I have a whole episode on when to press and when to rest. But this is kind of in that vein of, there's a point at which, you might be thinking, this is too much, or this isn't right, or my form is falling apart. What should I do? And that's something you're going to be asking yourself at various points throughout the entire cycle. I think about a workout that I administered today, priming workout for my group building to fall races. We were doing 300-meter builds, and we had them doing it on this loop that had some variable terrain. So they'd have a little bit of hill stimulus as well as a little bit of flat stimulus for these builds, building every 100 in a 300-meter build. And, I had them doing 6 to 9 loops of these 300-meter builds. Some people got to 7 and said, that's it. Some people got to 6, said, that's it. Some people got to 8, said, that's it. Some people did all 9, but they were appropriately saying, hey, I think I'm on the edge today. This is early season. We should stop here, right? I'm like, yes. Mm-hmm. You're in range of the workout. You're making the right call. Live to fight another day. And so you're going to have decisions like that throughout the whole cycle. And this is just when the stakes become a little higher on those decisions. But if your gut's telling you something's not right, listen to it. Live to fight another day. Get to the start line healthy, as you said. So that's number 3, don't bury yourself. Number 4, don't put them too close together. You talked about a 3-week spacing between them, or at least them being every 3rd week late in the cycle, which is generally how we write them and prescribe them. But somebody who's newer to them and maybe the first time doing a couple, maybe they put 4 weeks in between. Mm-hmm. You don't want them within 2 weeks of each other. You don't want them back to back. So, it's important that we calibrate it appropriately so we're not stacking these on top of each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you need your 10 days to 2 weeks to recover and absorb all the benefits. Not necessarily just recover, but absorb all the benefits of your workout. You talked about that when we were in the quality section, right? And so if they keep that in mind, and then you're reminded that also we have a down week every 3rd week, that's kind of how it falls into that 21-day cycle you've also discussed before, and also just the every 3rd. Sometimes I do have them even in group programming where they might be only 2 weeks apart, but it's in that rare case where when I'm writing programming, let's say I'm writing long run schedules for every single weekend of the year through a block. Well, and I arrive at a situation where it's got a 3-week taper, and based on when we started the programming, I'll identify that they would either have to have 3 up weeks in a row right before they taper, or go 1 up, 1 down, 1 up, and then they taper. And I actually love when that little pattern kind of presents itself. Because I'm 50-50, whether you follow the 2-1 all the way through or you get that random every now and then because of race date weekends, that 1 up, 1 down. That's a scenario where I'm like, wait, they've got an isolated up week, right? And their body's used to 2 up weeks in a row consistently. So let me tuck in long run quality 2 there, drop them into a down week, and then boom, long run quality 3, the peak week, and then they taper. I'm like, that's a scenario where they're pretty tight. But otherwise, generally speaking, by abiding in the rules of our programming of 2 up weeks, 1 down, it kind of naturally puts it to where it's like, let's say I had them do 20 up week 1, 20 with long run quality 1 is the 2nd week, down week is the 3rd week, and then boom, they come back to a long easy followed by a long run quality again. So it falls into that pattern naturally.
Yep. So yeah, just keep them spaced ultimately. And when in doubt, give yourself a little more spacing and timing, which also, by the way, just reinforces something we talked about very early on in building your plan and macro, is making sure you have 20 weeks to put together a plan or 22 weeks to put together a plan. because if you're building each of these sections of the training, these periods the right way, you're going to have plenty of time to go from one to the next. And then when you get to this part of it, things aren't jammed together.
Mm-hmm.
So it just gives you that opportunity to breathe, which gives you the both the ability to assimilate the stimulus that you're working in with these long run workouts, but then also recover from them.
Mm-hmm.
So you get the benefit as well as the recovery so you don't get hurt. So don't put them too close together. That's our final don't. Reminding you of the 4. Don't add distance and intensity at the same time. Don't just do race pace for the entire run for these. Don't bury yourself and don't put them too close together. Those are our 4 don'ts. I could probably think of other don'ts too if we were to riff on this.
If we want to get on a high horse, well then come on. Don't you dare.
Right. So anyway, but that's a pretty good list of do's and don'ts. Examples. And we've kind of covered a few of them so far. You know, there's the most basic version is just race pace intervals. Again, we kind of like the 2 to 3 mile. So I usually do in the summer months, I like to do a 2 to sometimes up to 4, depending on the experience level, times 2 miles at race pace with either a half mile or a mile recovery in between. I like the shorter race pace intervals in the summer because I feel like the heat and humidity is already taxing enough, and you might have to be modifying paces because of the conditions. So giving them the smaller increments makes it a little bit more manageable. Or in the fall and cooler months, 2 times 3 miles at race pace would be an example, maybe up to 3 times 3 miles for the experienced athlete. So that's kind of a bread and butter version of the long run qualities. And then we get into the fun in and out ones. And then we get to the special named ones like the McClung Special, which closes out this chapter in the book, where we get to have fun and get creative with it. And for me as a coach, this is honestly where I like to have the most fun. I mean, it's rare that I just repeat them from cycle to cycle for a couple of reasons. One, it's just creativity, and it's a way for me to kind of flex my coaching creativity. But also I like to mix it up so that people aren't gamifying or learning to expect what's coming and then somehow getting better at it. I like to throw curveballs, you know, that muscle confusion we talk about in fitness or strength training is you want to kind of mix things up so that the body doesn't figure it out, so to speak. So anyway, but what are some examples of the other kind of 2 kinds, the more advanced ones?
I mean, I think that's great. I love the McClung Special because it touches on such a range of paces. And so I think it's better that they understand those elements, like, you know, starting early in the run for 3 to 5 miles where you're behind your race pace and working towards it. Like that's preparing the body for what's to come, slight recovery.
The start simulation, we call it.
Yeah, it mirrors race day. It's a microcosm of race day. I think it's more to do with where the athlete is as opposed to just saying generically what the workout is. Because someone a little bit newer, I actually do kind of lean on race pace where it might be like 3x2, 2x3, 1x6. Like that might be a nice intro to just getting the stimulus of long pace in a long run period.
Yep.
But as you mentioned earlier, you're leaving a lot on the table if you just stay in that like no man's land. And so that's when you start adding advancements. So whether it be in fartlek style where you do, 1 to 3 minutes of a faster pace like 5K to 10K followed by the race pace itself, or putting some tempo in middle miles. You could do like 2 slightly slower than race pace, slow it down, take a short recovery, put some tempo in the middle to get a lot of lactate rising in the bloodstream, and then boom, have them go back and start at their race pace and work down by like, 3 to 5 second increments for 2 to 3 miles. It's more about the what you're going for in the design of them as opposed to just me throwing out, here's the 3 key workouts. McClung Special, though, is on that list for what it's worth. That will often be one that I'll reserve as like a keystone workout. Unless, like, there was a time where we were using that in virtual programming and a big portion of the team was advancing. So I had, for a couple of seasons there, I had slid that to long run quality 2 and then added something on. So they had another stimulus to chase. But that was a very group-specific judgment call because that's what that team needed in the way of stimulus.
Yep. Yeah, the other thing we like to do late in these runs is, especially as you progress into the second or third long run quality, is add some sort of close simulation where you're working back to race pace, but then trying to progress to faster than that. Oftentimes down to potentially as fast as half marathon pace if you're feeling good, to simulate that race finish where you're having to close faster on tired legs and run that negative split. So we always like to, especially in that third long run workout, have some element of that where you're finishing faster to simulate getting to that line as quickly as you can when it counts. So those are some examples. If you want the full McClung special recipe, you'll have to buy the book. How about that? It's in chapter 20, the end of chapter 20. But anyway, yeah, a lot of fun. You can get creative with it. And there's no, often no like just black and white or hard and fast rules here. You can kind of have fun with it and be creative with it once you understand the variables, which we've kind of talked about today. So we'll wrap it here with that. Couple final reminders and notes as we usually end with. One, Friday afternoons, 2 p.m. Central. We do a Q&A every week, so come join us on that if you have questions about this episode or about your training. Always good questions on there. And you can see some of our old videos on our Instagram timeline if you want, but that'll just be on our @RogueRunning Instagram. You can also check out our training options at our website, roguerunning.com. Now is a good time to jump in person in Dallas or Austin areas, or virtually via group or one-on-one. If you're not sure about what you're seeing out there, just email us, coaching@roguerunning.com. I'll remind you, if you want to try to work with me, email me, chris@roguerunning.com. And I think that covers it. We'll wrap it here. Go get those long runs done. Not the long run qualities yet. Those should be saved for later in the season. And we'll talk to you guys next week.